Thank you very much for having me, Jim. I joined Netflix in October of last year as the company's first sustainability officer, where together with teams from across the company, I seek to tackle our carbon footprint, raise awareness through our film and television content, and engage our millions of members on climate and environmental change. Now, working at Netflix, it's impossible not to start with a film reference. So, do you remember the 2004 film, The Day After Tomorrow, in which scientists' warnings about climate change are ignored, imperiling life on Earth? How about classics like Snowpiercer or Wall-E? Same story. As well-known physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it, you know it's true. Every disaster movie begins with a scientist being ignored. So let's not live through a disaster movie. Let's instead start with the science. In 1857, a woman named Eunice Foote discovered what she called the greenhouse effect. She performed a series of experiments where she filled glass cylinders with different gases, placed them in the sun, and measured temperature changes. Her findings demonstrated that the sun's rays are warmer when passing through moist air compared to dry air, and they're warmest when shining through carbon dioxide. Then in 1912, the first reports started to make headlines showing how fossil fuel combustion was adding carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, creating a blanket around the Earth. Having largely ignored the warnings from the scientific community, 160 years later, we're building up a massive blanket of greenhouse gases that's overheating our home. That overheating is happening quite quickly. In our children's lifetime, we could see the average global temperature jump 7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 4 degrees Celsius. Again, that's in our children's lifetime. This photo was taken the day San Francisco's sky turned orange from wildfire smoke last year. This was the middle of the day, but the park was deserted. It was too eerie for most people to venture outside. This thickening blanket of pollution traps heat in the atmosphere, just as Eunice Foote showed 160 years ago. That heat causes stronger hurricanes, bigger fires, more frequent floods, and the extinction of thousands of species. But there's good news. Humans can fix this. To stop the pollution blanket, we just have to stop polluting, and Netflix has a role to play. Today, stabilizing the planet at no more than a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise is the single most urgent and all-encompassing environmental, nay, humanitarian challenge in human history. It's necessary if we're to be successful in protecting natural resources and living things, ourselves included. It's fundamental to equity and inclusion, since it is ultimately an access issue of who will have access to the life support systems we all rely upon, like clean air, affordable food, and stable weather. Unfortunately, an unstable climate disproportionately impacts communities of color, younger generations, and women. Climate also happens to be the most material environmental topic to Netflix, according to our investors. What often gets overlooked is that acting on climate change requires protecting nature, which in turn is acting on climate. The two are inextricably linked. Natural systems, especially tropical forests and oceans, have been the invisible soldiers, stabilizing the Earth's climate for 10,000 years, allowing humans to evolve, civilize, and then industrialize. Without insects and coral reefs, for example, both at severe risk in a warming world, we lose free crop pollination and fisheries. In other words, dinner. When it comes to extreme heat, we see every day in the newspapers evidence of heat domes, wildfires, cyclones, persistent drought, and desertification of forests and grasslands. Extreme heat is killing vulnerable families in their beds at night, baking shellfish in their shells and cooking fruit on trees. Scientists around the world agree we need to stabilize the climate at no more than a 1.5 degree temperature rise to avoid the worst results of climate change and ensure healthy life support systems for our children. And they estimate that we have about 8 years to halve the world's emissions to make that possible. So we at Netflix got ourselves organized. We established a sustainability office and invited an incredible group of scientists, policy influencers, and professional storytellers to advise and provoke us. We set out 10 principles to guide our path. Amongst them, move fast, but ground everything in science. Focus on what matters, not what's most visible, and prioritize scalability over novelty. First, we measured our carbon footprint for the first and last 2 years and got that audited. Netflix's footprint was 1.1 million metric tons in 2020. Over 90% of those emissions are indirect, emissions from companies we buy from. Roughly half of that footprint lies within the physical production of the stories you watch on Netflix, followed by our corporate operations and things we purchase. We use cloud providers like Amazon Web Services and an Open Connect network to stream our service. Those together account for just 5% of the footprint. With that work under our belts, 6 months after the Netflix Sustainability Office was established, on March 30th, 2021, we debuted Net Zero plus Nature, our target to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by next year. Net Zero plus Nature is a combination of science-driven internal carbon reductions plus the power of nature to stabilize the climate. We've put our internal emissions reductions on a 1.5-degree pathway, aligned with climate science, and invested in external projects around the world that retain and remove carbon from the atmosphere, such as protecting forests above and below water. If you've ever been on a seesaw, you'll recognize what we call the 3 R's of Net Zero plus Nature. We reduce our own emissions in line with climate science first and foremost. We also remove carbon from the atmosphere by regenerating natural ecosystems. And to keep the whole thing stable, we retain existing carbon storage by protecting at-risk natural ecosystems. Now, that first R is the most important. We'll reduce our own emissions in line with the Paris Agreement goal of keeping global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. We do this by first optimizing energy use, then electrifying it, and decarbonizing the rest. That works for individuals just as it does for organizations. In my family's home, we first optimized energy use by upgrading to efficient lighting and equipment. We then electrified our transport by upgrading to an electric car, which my children enjoy plugging in. And lastly, to decarbonize the rest, we put solar on the roof and bought clean power from our utility for the rest. That same sequence makes sense almost anywhere, including at Netflix. To optimize our productions, we use local crews wherever possible, which cuts down on travel, creates local jobs. And we donate leftover food because food waste produces methane. We use LED set lights, which are 75% more energy efficient and generate less heat, so we don't need to cool the set. Oh, and by the way, makeup stays on better, so our talent are happier. In our corporate offices, I'm particularly excited about our new facility in Los Angeles called Epic, where we worked with the landlord to cut energy use by 15% above even the very strict energy requirements in California. And it's also the first large office building in Los Angeles to use building integrated photovoltaics. Next, electrify. Our priority here is swapping out diesel generators with mobile batteries and electric vehicles for cast and crew. We're experimenting on both for productions, and we will partner with vendors to scale up supply. We also provide free EV charging to the majority of our employees. Lastly, decarbonize. We're cleaning up the remaining power by purchasing 100% renewable electricity for all our operations. In 2020, we procured 100% renewable electricity where possible, including by paying a small premium to the utilities serving our California headquarters and London studio. And everywhere else, we bought renewable energy credits. Now, the second R is to retain existing carbon storage. By the end of 2021, for emissions we can't avoid internally, we'll fully neutralize them by investing in projects that prevent carbon from entering the atmosphere in the first place. We'll start by conserving at-risk natural areas like tropical forests that are critical to meeting global climate goals. We're already executing on this in Oregon, British Columbia, and Kenya. The third R is to remove carbon from the atmosphere, bring all remaining emissions to net zero by investing in the regeneration of critical natural ecosystems. These projects, like restoring grasslands, mangroves, and healthy soils, capture and store carbon, in addition to, of course, a myriad of local benefits. We issued an RFP and vetted contenders through a multi-step process. We actually vetted 100 million metric tons of climate action projects from over 30 countries to identify the highest quality ones. Now, as an entertainment company, most of our emissions come from producing film and television shows. And greenhouse gas accounting guidelines call for internet transmission and user device-related emissions to be accounted for by internet service providers and device manufacturers, since they have operational control over their design, manufacture, and operation. But we still want to contribute to robust measurement of the carbon footprint of streaming. So we've joined a research effort called DIMPACT that is establishing consensus on how to measure the footprint of streaming. Recently, the Carbon Trust published a white paper called The Carbon Impact of Streaming, and the New York Times profiled an academic analysis in the journal Joule talking about exactly that. The well-regarded conservation scientist Peter Kariva once said, "Science tells us what to do, while storytelling makes us want to do it." Indeed, people come to Netflix for the incredible stories told by our creative partners. I'm delighted to share that in 2020 alone, 160 million households around the world chose to watch at least one story on Netflix that helped viewers better understand the issues and highlight hopeful solutions around sustainability, or both. These titles include award-winning Netflix originals that deepen our appreciation for our home planet, like Emmy Award-winning Our Planet, which we made available for free to all during the pandemic, or My Octopus Teacher, this year's Oscar winner, or Breaking Boundaries with Dr. Johan Rockström and Sir David Attenborough, which was featured at Joe Biden's Leaders Climate Summit, the G7, and the Nobel Summit. We couple forceful calls for action, like Breaking Boundaries, with shows like these that shine a playful light on hopeful solutions. And we're excited to support our creative partners in climate-savvy storytelling. For more detail, please take a look at sustainability.netflix.com. True to form, there's a short film there with footage you can recognize from Netflix TV and film shows, but there's also an in-depth report for investors and technical experts. With that, I'll leave you with these quotes from some of the many luminaries in the field we are privileged to be advised by. And thank you again for your time.